some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight and next week is some pretty tough stuff. It's some pretty hard stuff. We've gone through this series of Paul's letters, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, for this whole entire year. And I was really saying, okay, God, what is it that you kind of want us to talk about these last couple of weeks leading into summer, kind of leading into it? And time again, I have found myself getting back to the subject of mental illness or mental health care or what's going on mentally with students in this generation. And so one thing that I absolutely love to do is I actually love studying about youth culture. I love studying about Gen Z. I love learning about how you guys think, how you operate, why you do what you do, why you dress the way you dress, why you like to watch what you watch, why you like to, just the whole culture of your generation, I absolutely love. And I love being able to study and learn about that. And so we're going to talk tonight and next week about really what it is to have that mental health. And we're going to talk about the mental illnesses and the mental things that go on in the Christian faith. Because let me just kind of say this right out of the gate. When we hear or we think of the term mental illness, what do we instantly think of? Well, we think of some dude in a straitjacket in a padded room, who's bouncing off the walls, who's losing his mind. He's drooling on windows. He's running into things. And we have this mindset of okay, this is what it is. These crazy guys, because we've all watched TV shows, we've all seen movies where there's the crazy people, right? There's someone crazy in every episode and they're wild and they got all these issues going on. There's all these things happening. And really entertainment says this is what mental illness looks like. This is what the picture of it is, and it's this extreme look of what it is, and that's what they're saying. This is what mental illness is, and they've made this to the extreme. And I'm not going to really talk about the extreme. I'm going to talk about the reality. I'm going to talk about the reality of what is going on in your generation. I'm going to talk about what you are actively dealing with each and every day. We're going to talk about what your classmates are dealing with. We're going to talk about what people you might work out with, you hang out with, people that you're friends with on Snapchat and Instagram, teens that you might follow, influencers, people like that. The reality is that mental illness is something that is very real to us. Very real to us. In my studies, I found that actually 3 in 4 teens have reported struggling with being lonely. A struggle with being lonely and this loneliness that comes with mental illness. 2 out of 3 teenagers report high anxiety. 3 out of 5 are reported in depression. And this is a global study that is done around the world where people they surveyed all these American teens and they found that out of all these American teens and all these things, that the United States teenagers ranked in the top 5 countries with the highest rate of loneliness, anxiety, and depression. Which is wild because we live in America. The home of the brave, the land of the free. We got all the cool stuff. We got Disney World. We got McDonald's started here. We have all this. We're Americans. We got baseball and all this great stuff. We live in America. America is great. But yet, as great as America is for us, as free as we are, we have these things that are really holding us down and not allowing us to live in the freedom that we really want to. Because when you're feeling alone all the time, even when you're around people, when you have high levels of anxiety and depression, even when you're around all these people with all these amazing things, the reality is it's very hard to do life. It's hard to live life this way. And what's even sadder than any of this is when I was doing an in-depth study about this. So that age group from 13 to 15 years old, some of you in the room, they are transitioning from middle school into high school. And there are more suicidal ideations and mindsets in a teenager 13 to 15 than there are in teenagers 16 to 19. There's something about that 13 to 15-year-old mindset that when you're struggling with these things, you begin to think that your life isn't worth living. You begin to think that this isn't worth it. And you begin to think these unhealthy mindsets. A couple years ago, a documentary I guess it was a show came out, 13 Reasons. Did anyone watch that 13 Reasons Why on Netflix? It was all about teen suicide. And so many people are like, Pastor Micah, you need to watch this. Pastor Micah, I don't need to watch that. I don't need to watch that. I'm very aware of what goes on with teenagers. I'm very aware of what is happening with students. I'm very aware of what you guys struggle with and what's going on. And so what we have to understand that in the U.S., you have the highest suicide rate connected to mental illness in the entire world is teenagers in America. Because of all the pressures that they deal with, because of everything that's going on. In our country, in America, we have the highest rate of suicide among teenagers because of things of the mental illness are impacting our life. The loneliness, the depression, the anxiety, all of these things. And as I was studying these things, I began to think, okay, like, wow, teens are really struggling more than I even realized. Even more than I ever realized. You guys are dealing with and you're under the pressure of things that I couldn't imagine even myself years ago being able to deal with. The amount of things that are out there culturally that are pressuring you to be this way, to be that way. Because it's almost like you have all of these culture telling you got to be liked, you got to be popular, you got to have people view you got to have people see you got to have all of these things that the culture is telling you have to be, but yet you're struggling with your identity. But all these people are telling you have to be this way, but you really just want to be this person. But all these people are influencing, telling you have to look like this, you have to dress like this, you have to act like this, you have to be like this. And there's all these influences that are around you. And what that causes you to do is to feel like everything is like falling in around you. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with being a teenager in today's society? How do we deal with being a young adult in today's society? But know that mental illness is real. Because you might be in the room and you might struggle with anxiety. You might struggle with depression. You might struggle with loneliness. You might struggle with OCD disorder. You might be struggling with any one of these things. Because the reality is, in a room with all of these students, we are going to have struggles with these things. And so it made me think, how do we as Christians, how do we as people that profess to love Jesus deal with this mental illness and this mental struggle? And that's what we're going to look at tonight and we're going to look at next week. Because I really want us to get an overview of what is going on in our world, our culture, but really what is happening in your everyday life. But before I even get to that, I want to tell you something sincerely from my heart to yours that I want you to understand. Even people that are going to be watching this on YouTube or whatever, I want to get one thing straight right out the bat. Sometimes as Christians within the culture of the Christian church, we believe really that we over-spiritualize things sometimes, and we believe that we can spiritualize away the mental health struggles of people in life. Now, I will tell you that does God heal people? Absolutely, 100%. I have prayed with people who have been have physical problems and they've been healed. I have. I've prayed with people I prayed with a little girl who was a little girl. Her mom came up and it was in this church. We prayed over her years ago that she would stop having seizures. She has never had a seizure since the day we prayed with her. So I believed in supernatural healings. I believe in all of that. But I also want you to believe that just like God can do miracles, God can work through doctors and therapists and counselors and youth leaders and volunteers and people like that can listen to you. God uses people to help people. And so I don't ever want to take that away where if you're struggling with something, you're just like, oh, you need to just go pray about it, or you just need to have more faith in God. No, we're not going there. We're not going to just over-spiritualize things. We're going to talk about the real emphasis of like what this is. And it's like, you need to trust God more, or God's just testing you. No, we're not going there. No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about that. And that is because sometimes what happens is when we feel like, think about our sin. Think about life of sin. How many of you have ever told a lie? Listen, if you're not raising your hand right now, you're telling a lie, right? Like, we have all told a lie. How many of you ever got caught telling the lie? Okay, like, right. How do you feel when you get caught telling the lie? You feel ashamed. You feel ashamed. You're like, man, I should have just told the truth. If I just told the truth, and you feel stupid and you feel ashamed. And so even in sin, when we tell a lie and we get caught, we know that feeling of shame. We know that feeling of like, man, like I don't like, this doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to feel shameful. It doesn't feel good to be like, have that feeling of shame. See, a lot of times what we've done, especially in the Christian culture, we have over-spiritualized mental illness so much that we shame people into thinking that maybe they're just not good enough for God to heal them or love them or do anything for them. And a lot of times that's what happens. And then what happens is people that struggle with these mental illnesses, people that are struggling with these things going on, they feel ashamed of what they're done. And so they don't really want to be open up to anyone to talk. Because guys, understand this, shame will keep us in chains. Shame, that's what it does. It keeps you locked down. Shame is a tool of the enemy that tells you, yeah, you're not worthy. You're not good enough. Because you struggle with depression, you must really not love Jesus. Because you struggle with a loneliness, you must really not. Because you struggle with anger and OCD and all these things, you must really not love Jesus. And so we believe that we aren't worth the support. And I want to address that right off the bat to say right up front with you that really I want you to I want you to get this tonight. If you are in this room or you're watching and you're struggling with mental illness is not a sin. I want you to understand that. Struggling with mental illness is not a sin. It's not a sin. And that's not an opinion that Pastor Mike is just saying. No, that's a fact. It's a straight up fact. That when you struggle with mental illnesses, it's not something that's sin. Let's go back to this. What is sin? Sin is something that means that you miss the mark, that like God wants you to live a certain way. He wants you to be a certain way, but you're making the decision to not do what God's telling you to do, so you keep missing the mark of where God wants you to be. Mental illness is not a sin. You're not making the choice. Like, think about it. How many of you want to make a choice? I'm just going to be sad today. Or I'm just going to have feelings of anxiety all day. Or I'm going to be mad all the time and want to break stuff. No, we don't choose to do that. There's something that goes on that we're going to talk about here in a moment that really does that. And perhaps you've heard a Christian or maybe even a pastor or maybe even a church leader say, well, mental illness is a sin. No, it is not. It is not a sin. Mental illness is a health condition dealing with chemicals in the brain. That's really what they find. Anxiety, depression, anger, all of these mental illnesses that we face, that we deal with, a lot of it specifically has to do with what's going on in the level activities in your brain with chemicals. There are two major things that really bring out the stressors when it comes to the chemicals in your brain. It's stress and hormones. So let's think about being a teenager for a second. How many of you were stressed out today by something? Right? Like something just stressed you out today, right? And in your teenage years, in your adolescence, that's when you're going through hormones. That's when you're dealing with all of this. You start going, when you transition from being a kid to being a teenager, things begin to change. You get taller, right? You get hairier. Just be real, right? You get fatter. Your body changes. You begin to smell and you got to be like, oh man, I got to wear more deodorant or I got to take a shower more or whatever it is. Like, we think about what goes through the mind of when you're going through your hormones. Like boys used to think like, ooh, girls are gross. And now they're like, hey, she's kind of cute. We go through these hormonal things as we change, as we grow older, and the hormones are running in our body. And, you got all of these things. And then just talk about the stressors, man. Like, you're trying to go to school. You're trying to play sports. You're trying to work a job. You're trying to hang out with your friends. You're trying to hang out with your girlfriend or boyfriend. You're trying to make these people happy. You're trying to make those people happy. You have all of these things that are going on. And we talk about hormones and we talk about stressors. Hello, yes, this is happening. This is real life. And listen, I'm not here. We're not going into anatomy class or biology class. I'm not qualified to teach any of those. But what I am able to say to you is that when it comes to mental illness, it is not a sin, but it's a biological thing that's going on in your body. It's a biological thing. How many of you know Chow? How many know Chow? Chow works like, look, this is Chow. Chow is the man, right? Chow is the man. And Chow and I have been talking all week about this. And Chow, those of you that don't know Chow, Chow works with Refuge. He's been with me over almost like going on 3 years. He's been with me. And Chow is the man. He runs our Bellwood campus. He does all of our digital media. He does all of our videos. He does all of these things. But the one thing that you might not know about Chow is actually a diabetic. So what that means is his body is not producing enough insulin. Therefore, he has this illness that is diabetic, and he takes medication, which is synthetic insulin, to treat it. That's what he does because he's diabetic. He has to take insulin. He's got this pump on, and there's been times where he's like, man, my blood sugar's going there. Like, I need to run home. I did this, do that. Like, I need to get something to eat. And so, we realize that, this is something that he deals with each and every day. And so why am I telling you about Chow and his insulin and all this stuff? Well, I'm telling you this because just the same, the body of a person with mental illness there's not producing enough chemicals in the brain sometimes to be able to level out the way they should. So I want you to understand tonight that when it comes to the mental illness, there is a biological in your body thing that goes on sometimes where things are not leveling out the way that they should. There are other factors, though, that do play into what leads to mental illness. Don't get me wrong. There's a biological factor, but then there's also life experience, such as children or people that have been through trauma or abuse. You have soldiers who go and fight in military. Like my best friend Greg, growing up, he went and fought over in Afghanistan in the Afghan war. He was one of the first people to go over when they did. He did not have a lot of mental things like wrong with him, but when he went there, he's like, man, like the war that I had to go through, what I had to do, man, it really messed me up in my head. So experiences and trauma can allow your chemicals and your mindset to get off. Then there is family history. There's a family history of mentalness that goes on. But what I want you to understand tonight, I want you to understand that anyone can struggle with mental illness, even those that love Jesus deeply. I know a lot of Christians who deeply love Jesus. They love Jesus more than anyone in this room, but yet they also do struggle with some mental illnesses going on. And so why am I telling you this? Why am I telling you on this? Because I want you to understand that having mental illness is not a sin, but you can't allow it for you in your life to run you and then allow you to sin. That's the difference. Having mental illness is not a sin, but also you cannot let it cause you to sin. But you see, what begins to happen is because we know that something's wrong with us and something's not right up here, we go and we try to fix those things on our own. We try to make it happen on our own. We're like, oh, I got this. I can fix this on my own. You ever try to fix something on your own, and when you tried to fix it, you made it even worse? Like, oh, yeah, I can fix this, and then it's even worse than when you started, and you're like, man, I should have never touched that. I should have never done that. See, with mental illness, what happens sometimes, they're like, oh, you know what? Like, no, I know, like, I'm feeling lonely, so what I can do is I can just go from relationship to relationship. And maybe if I just have, my boyfriend wants to have sex, so we're just going to have sex, and maybe that will make me feel not alone. And then you go from that relationship to another one, to another, to one. And then you feel like, you know what, that loneliness can be satisfied if I just simply, have sex and sleep around. And maybe that will help me because I feel good in the moment, but then you don't feel good later. And see, this is what's happening. It causes you to sin. You say, oh, well, maybe if I begin to drink this, or maybe if I smoke that, or maybe if I do this, it will help me deal with what's going on in my heart. It'll help me with what's going on in my head. Maybe if I just look to all of these other things, then everything's going to be okay. And that's a lot of times what ends up happening, is that we allow it to take control of our life. And whether it's self-harm, self-medicating, drugs, alcohol, sex, or unhealthy coping mechanisms, there's all these things that we think are good that are going to help cure what's going on up here, but yet that's not how the cure happens. Sometimes the cure happens by going to a doctor and them being able to test you, by going and getting your levels worked out in your mind so that you'll be good. Sometimes it's going to a therapist and being able to talk. It's going to a counselor. Sometimes it's going to a pastor and being able to sit there and talk with you. There are many ways that you can deal with mental illness, and there are many ways that you can do this. And even as a Christian, you can deal with this. And so you got to understand that God really cares about what's going on in your mind. He cares about what's going on up here. It's very clear. He says this in Matthew chapter 11. He says, come to me all who are tired, worn down, and burdened, and I will give you rest. So he does care about what's going on in your mind. He cares about how tired you are, how your anxiety has just crippled you, how your depression keeps you sad and lazy. He cares about all of these things, and he's literally saying, listen, all who are dealing with things right now that are going on, and this isn't just physically tired. This is mentally, emotionally, spiritually. All of you that are tired, come to Jesus. He said, I'm going to give you rest. I'm going to give you the rest that you need, because true peace is Jesus. Knowing Jesus is knowing true peace. And you need to stay steadfast with that and make sure that you're connected to that. Because listen to me, you're more than your mental illness. I want you to hear that. You are more than your mental illness. If someone begins to talk to you and ask you, hey, I never met you before, what's your name? A lot of times in conversation, we'll be like, yeah, my name is Micah, and I struggle with OCD, and I struggle with ADHD, and I struggle with all these things. And we allow a mental illness to define who we are. You are more than your mental illness. You're more than that. You're not defined by that. You're not just some depressed or some anxious teenager. No, you're not defined by that. That's not how God defines people. It actually says in Galatians chapter 4 that you are God's own child, and since you are a child of God, you're an heir to his things. You're an heir to his kingdom. So you are not defined by the mental illness you struggle with, but you are defined by being a child of God. And I want us to understand that. And I want us to get that. And so while we're thinking about it, in order for us to deal with the journey of realizing, okay, like what is going on with this mental illness? What is happening? Now, I want everyone to understand what I'm about to say. This is very important. There are those that deal with mental illness. They deal with depression. They deal with anxiety. They deal with all of these really serious mental illnesses. Then there are those of us that experience those moments. There are those that experience a level of anxiety. There are those that experience a level of depression. There are those that experience a level of anger. So there are those of us who experience those things, but we don't live in those things. And so we have to understand that there are people that are living in those things each and every day. But then there are those of us who experience those things. The moment of depression, the moment of heartbreak, the moment of loneliness. So realize that we have to be able to define, is it a moment, an experience that we're having, or is it something that we're living in? So how do we recognize those things? How do we know this? Well, you have to look for the signs, right? You have to look for the signs. It is no secret that I like Chick-fil-A. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not a secret. Many people know that. Many people are very aware. Pastor Micah loves Chick-fil-A. It's just how it is. When I travel and go places, I don't look for the McDonald's sign. I don't look for the Wendy's sign. I might look at the Chipotle sign. Let's be real, Greta. You know, like, we'll look for Chipotle. But if I see a Chick-fil-A sign, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the Chick-fil-A sign. So I'm looking for the sign that's going to get me to where I need to be. Why? Because, like, let's just be real. I really like Chick-fil-A. I like it a lot. So I'm looking for that sign in order to get me where I am. Y'all know that my wife absolutely loves Starbucks. She loves Starbucks. That's what she loves. So when we travel and we go down to North Carolina to visit her family, she is looking for the Starbucks sign. Why? Because she wants to get to the destination that can get her an extra hot flat white. No flavor. I know, right? But I know her order. I haven't met. I know her order. That's what she wants. She wants Starbucks. So when we travel, we're looking for the Chick-fil-A sign. We're looking for the Starbucks sign. Why? Because that will tell us where we need to go turn by turn in order to get where we need to get to. And the thing is we have to be able to recognize the signs in our life that begin to happen. You need to recognize the signs of the mental illness as it begins to unfold. Just like getting hurt physically, You'll have a sign physically when you begin to get hurt. How many of you ever got a cramp in your leg, right? Cramp in your arm, whatever it might be. You wake up, you're like, I got a cramp. You know, like Marcus knows all about cramps all the time. I hope he watches because I want Marcus Huggins knows all about cramps because he used to get them all the time as a teenager. But a lot of times a cramp will lead to like something is not right. Something is not right. And so we have to understand that, like, when I'm hurting and I go to the gym in the morning, I'm hurting, I'll talk to my coach, Ange, and Ange will be like, well, you're hurting down here because this isn't right up here. And so she's able to help tell the sign of why I'm physically in pain because of the sign of something that has happened. So we have to understand that we have to look for the things that are going on in our life. Is it affecting our mood? Am I wanting to punch everybody in the throat every time they talk to me? Am I wanting to isolate myself from everybody? And listen, like, we got to know the difference. Are people just annoying sometimes? Yes. But do you genuinely just want to be away from everybody? Yes. Okay. So we got to be really careful with that. You might have a loss of appetite, or you're feeling overly tired. Your emotional feelings might go from being super happy one second and then losing your mind the next second. And it might be this pendulum swing that goes left and right. So you go from angry, sad, to numb, to just not caring, to all these different things. You have to be able to tell the signs, and it's important. It's important because, guys, the thing is, mental illness is not black or white. It's not black or white. Mental illness is this big color spectrum of things that you look at, and you can't just say it's just this or just that. In certain seasons, we're going to deal with certain things that go on. Do you know in wintertime is when depression is at its highest? It really is. It's when it's highest. People are less depressed when it's nice outside. Why? Because of the atmosphere, because what is going on. And so we have to understand that we have to look for the signs in our life to say, is this a moment or is this something that I'm really struggling with and I really must struggle with it? So then what do? We go and we find out. We get a diagnosis. We talk to someone. We get some help. We got this, that. And trust me, I'm not against medicine. I'm not against getting the medicine that you need, but I am against over-medicating. I'll tell you that right now. So if you don't know, I will be glad to tell you, I have ADHD. Right? Back when I was a kid, it was actually, it was a hyper disorder. It was a hyper disorderness. Like I was a hyper kid. I'm a hyper adult. That's just the way that I am. I have a hard time paying attention sometimes. Now, my parents, just the way, when I was raised, how I was raised, I just had to learn to deal with it. I had to learn to adapt it to my system. If I was a kid now, like you, they would have put me on Ritalin and everything else under the sun to calm me down because it would have been seen as something. So I want you to understand that, yes, medication is important and you should get it, but don't allow it to run your life. Don't become so over-medicated with your life. But go talk to someone. Go get a diagnosis. Find out what's going on. And then if you get a diagnosis or you know someone that's affected and has a diagnosis, one thing I'm going to tell everyone is you we must give them grace. We must give them grace. We must be patient with them. We must be patient with ourselves as well. Because as you begin to deal with a mental illness, you begin to get frustrated with yourself. Why am I thinking this way? Why am I living this way? Why am I doing things this way? Why are things going on? And we have all these things that happen in our mind. And then you might have friends where one day they're your BFF and the next day they're like, blown, like they blocked you on every social media and you're not sure what's going on. And they're dealing with some type of diagnosis that's coming out in their life with mental illness and you don't know why they're acting this way, but they're acting this way. You're like, what's going on? Well, the diagnosis they got wasn't the best diagnosis, so you need to have grace and patience with them to work through. The Bible says something really cool in Galatians. It says, share each other's burdens. In this way, you obey Christ. I want you to understand tonight that if you're suffering with a mental illness, doesn't mean you have to do it alone. It doesn't mean that you have to do it alone. Because you have people in your life, you have people, friends, family, youth leaders, people that love you, that care about you. We are going to walk this out with you. We're going to walk it out. And I might not be able to actually physically feel your anxiety and depression, but I can sit with you as you do, and I can walk you through it, and I can be there to help you, and I can lead and guide and pray with you, and I can try to make you laugh. I can take you to eat. I can do whatever I can to be able to, how do I share this with you to allow it to be as easy as it can on you? And as Christians, that's what we're called to do, is to share each other's burden with one another, to be able to help one another in that. And this also means for those who trust in Jesus and believe in Jesus, we can be comforted that it's like, listen, he shares in our brokenness. He shares in our struggles. He shares with what is going on in our life. And the whole thing about suffering is like, it sucks. It's horrible. It's not okay to deal with by yourself. You don't have to deal with these things alone. You don't have to. And you're not alone in this. You have people that God has placed. You have God that is in your life that wants to help you walk through this. And it sucks. And our bodies are in the way they think, and the way they process, and the way we go through things. Like, we don't have to walk those out alone. But then what really begins to happen is we begin to believe that, well, because I'm this way and I'm not like everybody else, that something is wrong with me. And I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but how many of you have believed at some point that something was wrong with you because of the way that you acted, right? Like we've been there. We believe, like, what is wrong with me? Why am I dysfunctioning? Like, why am I even here? I'm broken. Like, this isn't like the way it should be. And like, God, like, did you make a mistake? Like, the design of my life, like, it's really a mistake? Am I like an oops? Did you mess up in my life? And we believe that we're broken and we're not useful because we're struggling with a mental illness. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's the furthest thing from the truth. That's the furthest thing from the truth. Many of you think that you have to be completely fixed in order to be loved. You have to be completely whole in order to be able to be useful. But I want you to understand a terminology that's been around for a while, and I think it's a great one. Broken crayon, still color. broken crayons still color. What do I mean by that? You ever get like you're coloring and you get kind of aggressive? You're like, with the blue, with the red, and then all of a sudden you snap that crayon. Well, what do? You peel apart the paper and you keep going. Why? Because it's still useful. Even though it's broken, it still has use. You got to understand, some of us in this room, some of us that are watching, we might have some things in our life that are broken, but we're still useful and we're still loved and valued by God. You're still loved and valued by God. That's what I want us to understand tonight. In all of this, God's purpose and plan in your life, in being in relationship with Him, He's working, moving, and designing things in your life to work. And so many times we believe that because there's something wrong with us, that we can't be used and we can't be loved. That is a lie. The value of your life is not attached to your illness. It's attached to your identity of who God's called you to be. So we have to have that understanding that dealing with all of these things that we deal with and all these things that happen, you got to understand what God does. See, so many times in life, we like to try to be the superhero in other people's lives. I mean, think about it. Like, our culture is obsessed with Marvel, DC, superheroes, all of these things. If it's not like Captain America, it's Captain Underpants. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's all of these, like, from one to the, there's extreme of superheroes. Why? And we're obsessed with that. And sometimes when we see people struggling, we see people going through things, I'm going to be the superhero that makes everything right in their life. I'm going to do all these things to help them. But yet, you're struggling. You might be in this room and you struggle with depression and your friend has come to you and said, hey man, I'm feeling really depressed. I'm dealing with depression. Can you help me? And you're more willing to help them with what they're going through than to deal with what you're going through. Your friend's struggling with anxiety. You struggle with anxiety, but it's easier for you to help them, encourage them, speak words into them, carry their burdens than it is for you to deal with yourself. You have to be able to say, okay, I need to deal with what's going on in my life as well. And I really believe that's important. You got to understand, too, when it comes to the value. You have God that values you, and you have people around you that value you. That's the biggest thing. Guys, this is not my notes, but I have personally had to do funerals for teens that have committed suicide, that have dealt with mental illness. I had to do the funeral. And the one message that I had to do at all these funerals that I have done is that your life has value, that your life means something. It's worth it. You got to understand that God loves you so much. In Psalms 139, it says this, God saw you before you were born, and every day of your life is recorded in the book, in God's book. Every moment was laid out before a single day has passed. Every moment of your life. Every step that you make, everything that you do. And like, you got to understand that like every single day, every single second of every single moment of your entire life was recorded by God and laid out. The good moments, the bad moments, the happy moments, the silly moments, the crazy moments, whatever the moments are, God knows what's going on. God wrote them down. He knows our life. And we goes on to find in Ephesians, God says, you're a masterpiece. He's created you anew in Jesus. So you can do good things that He had planned out long ago. You know what it doesn't say on there? It doesn't say that you're a masterpiece, but because you deal with anxiety, you're not. It doesn't say, oh, you're a masterpiece, but just because you deal with OCD, you're not. No, it doesn't say that. It says you're a masterpiece, period. And He has created you anew in Christ. God knows you perfectly and completely, and He still declares you a masterpiece. Even in the brokenness, even in the frustration, even feeling like I don't have value, even feeling like I'm struggling with a mental illness, God still calls you a masterpiece. That's a powerful thing that we need to understand. A powerful thing. And we got to realize these things in our life. When we realize that He knew every detail about us, even before we were born, we are reminded that the purposes that He has for you, listen to me, everybody look at me, the purposes that He has for you are not corrupted or destroyed because of your mental illness. It's in despite of your mental illness, that God can still use you to deal with things. It's instead of that. And you got to understand that like there's a purpose and a plan for your life, even the way that you are. God knows how you are. He knows how you are. If you're goofy, God knows you're goofy. Right? If you're into like weird things, God knows you're into weird things. If you got you go home and you have a whole collection of pet rocks or something like that, God knows those things, right? God knows if you love basketball. God knows if you love this, if you love that. God knows all of these things about your life. He knows these things. He knows perfectly how you are, and he still declares you a masterpiece, and he still declares you have something that is meaning so much to him. But the purpose of him creating you, the purpose of your life, what he has for you, it's not corrupted by the mental illness that you face. It's not corrupted by this. And you got to understand something too. Your words, your emotions, your actions, they don't offend God, right? Like, God is not offended by your words, emotions, or actions. I mean, you ever do something where you screwed up real bad and you're like, oops, sorry, God. Like, oops, God, I didn't mean to do that. My bad. Like, God's not offended. He's not like, oh, they said that word. Oh, they treated that person that way. Oh, they're dealing with this, dealing with that. No, God's not offended by you, by your actions. He's not offended by when you're dealing with these things. Your words and emotions, they're not going to offend God because God knows you. Now, God is offended by your sin when you choose to sin and make a mistake to do something that's completely contrary. When God says, hey, come to me, all you who are burdened. Come to me and I will give you peace. Spend time with me. And like, nah, I'd rather go over here and smoke this and drink this and do all these things because this is what's going on right now. No, God is offended by that. Sin offends God. But your emotions and what you're going through and your thoughts and your processes, they're not offending God. Listen, there's not a question that you're going to think of that's going to offend God. If you sit here tonight and you're like, Mom, I don't even know if God's real, he's not offended by that. He's not offended by you questioning like, okay, well, God, if you're real, why do all these things happen in the world? He's not offended by that. And so we have to have this understanding of all of these things. God is ready to listen to you. He's ready to hear from you. He speaks to you in the Bible. He speaks to you in prayer. He speaks to you in those moments. And praying and having an honest conversation with God is one of the best things you could do. Listen, I wish some of you could see how I pray to God. It's wild. When I'm in my car and I'm praying to God, it's wild. It gets real. I talk to God like I'm letting it all out, man. I'm letting it out in my anger. I'm letting it out in my frustration. I'm letting it out in my sadness. I'm letting it out in every aspect of my life. I'm letting God know how I feel, what is going on, because I know that God can handle it. I know that God is faithful and is able to be there to handle all these things. See, in the Bible, one of the most spiritual men, if not the most one of the giants that we talk about of faith, where the Bible says, this is a man after my own heart. God gave a label to a human and said, this is the guy that's like, this is the guy. This is the guy that is after my heart. God gave that label to a man named David, right? We know David is the guy that killed Goliath. That's what we know. He flung a rock, killed Goliath, boom. And David was a great king of Israel. That's what we know. But the Bible says that David was the man after God's heart. But I want to read to you something that I found in the Bible. It has some old words in it, but it's the best way that I could read it. And then I'm going to explain to you what's going on. But I want you to understand, what I'm about to read for you is David, the king of Israel, the one that God said, yeah, that's the guy over my heart. This is what David prays to God. How long, O Lord, will you forget me? Forever? How long are you going to hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and in the sorrow in my heart every day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Lift my eyes up, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Let my enemies prevail. I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love, and my heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. The man after God's own heart is opening this psalm, opening this prayer is, God, how long are you going to forget about me? God, how long are you going to hide from me? How long are you going to let me deal with all of these things that are going on in my life? How long is this going to take? My enemies have overtaken me. Because what has happened in David's life, what happened is the enemy came in, they stole David's family, they stole his wife, they stole his kids, and his own son was trying to take over his kingdom. want to talk about a bad day? You want to talk about a guy dealing with confusion, sadness, not knowing what's going on? David is dealing with this, and he's saying, God, where are you? Where are you? I'm trying to find you, and I can't. And I read this, and I thought, oh my gosh, like, have you ever felt like this? Have you ever felt because you were struggling with something, and you, whether it was depression, anxiety, whatever it might be, have you ever felt like you were forgotten? Have you ever felt like God wasn't there, that he was hiding from you? You ever feel sorrow like David did? And I look at this and I'm thinking, man, this is just wild. Because David literally is saying, God, where are you when I'm dealing with this? And a lot of times when the mental illness in our life is rampant and it's running, you and I will say, God, where are you when I'm dealing with this? Where are you when I'm dealing with this? The anger, the hatred, the depression, the anxiety, the feeling of fear, the feeling of not feeling worthy enough. God, where are you when I deal with this? Because if you made me, if you say you loved me, if you said you're there for me, if you said all of these things, where are you? So the question is where is God when I'm dealing with this? Where is God when I'm dealing with what's going on in my mind? Where is God when I'm dealing with what's going on in my heart? Well, let me tell you where God is. God is in the same place that he has always been, with you. With you dealing with the suffering. So you don't think that it breaks God's heart that our heart breaks? The Bible actually talks about that God's heart breaks when our heart does. So we have to understand that, God, where are you? He's like, I'm here, I'm with you. I'm trying to do this with you. And God loves you, and he's there, and he's trying to do this with you. And maybe you're hurting. Maybe you're feeling like David in this. Maybe you're feeling forgotten, abandoned, hurting all day long. But I want to encourage you that God has not left you. He has not abandoned you, but he's right there with you. So why are we dealing with this? Well, it goes all the way back to the very beginning in the book of Genesis. When God created mankind, he created Adam and Eve, and he created them and they were whole. There was no sickness, no disease, no mental illness, nothing, zero, no problems. Perfect place. You could hang out with the animals, you could do all these things. It was absolutely perfect. But sin came into the world because they disobeyed God. And because that which was whole was now cracked, there was effects of that crack that would go through all humanity. And now we deal with sickness and disease, and we deal with all these things. Why? Because of sin in the very first place. And you might say, okay, well then why does God heal those people and not heal me? I would love to tell you that I have the perfect answer to that question. Why is it that I have prayed over people to get healed, and things that have gone on in my life have not been healed? I've got to a place where I just have to realize that it's not always about the why. It's not about why, God, do you do this or why don't you do that? But it's that, you know what, God, I don't care about the why. I care about who you are. Despite what I want, I'm still going to serve you. Despite what I can get, I'm still going to serve you, and I'm still going to love you, and I'm still going to be faithful. David said, listen, I trust in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to you because you have dealt bountifully and blessed me. No matter what we're dealing with, we don't know the why. We don't know why we're dealing with depression and anxiety. We don't know these things, but what we do know is that God is with us, and he has not left us, and he's going to help us get through this. The solution to the problem is spending time with God, is being there with God. And I'm not saying, listen, if you go pray every night and all these things, your depression is going to go away. Could it? Yes. But what if it doesn't? Well, you still have God to fall back on. You still have God, because the brokenness and the incompleteness of humankind from the very beginning, there's still going to be brokenness that we deal with, but God is still with us. God is still faithful to who we are. You know that God saw you even as the thought before you were even around. He saw you before you were even in your mother's womb. God has not taken his eyes off of you yet. And he never will. He never will. He cares for you. He feels your pain. He's not judging you because of your pain. He's not condemning you. Listen, I want us to understand that anyone can deal with mental illness. Anyone can deal with these things. But as Christians, we have to understand that we have a solution that can help us. It can aid us. It can be something that we have to our advantage, and that's being that I can go to God. And there will be things that God does that is able to do amazing things, and there'll be healings, and there'll be answered prayers, and then over here there might not be. And it's not because he doesn't want to. It's not because he's evil. It's not because he's bad. It's just because, you know what? I don't know. There's certain things in life that we don't have the answers for. But what I do know is that God is faithful. Just because I don't get what I want doesn't mean that God's not good. And the thing about mental illness is this, as I'm going to wrap this up. Mental illness is something that if it hasn't affected us, it affects those around us. Guys, I read you the stats in this room right now with all of you in here. Right now, 3 out of 4 are dealing with loneliness. 2 out of 3 are dealing with anxiety. 3 out of 5 are dealing with depression. In this room right now. And some of you might be medicated. Some of you might have to take medication. Guess what? Keep taking it. Keep doing that. Like, that's great. Like, I want you to continue to be faithful to what your doctor said, that he can help you and he can be there. Keep doing that. But also keep believing that God is with you. Keep believing that, have faith that God loves you. Keep realizing that just because you're struggling with a mental illness, that you're still valued. And he still has a purpose and a plan for you. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes tonight.